Yeah, looks good. Okay, great. So I gave a presentation last week, actually, also at HKUST. We called it Patent 101, and it was really just to explain the background principles of patent law. In case some of you weren't there, I will go through some basics, but I won't go as much into detail, and then I will dive into sort of patent drafting for scientists. Maybe just to get a vague sense, how many of you have ever worked on drafting a patent application? Can I just get a sense? I don't know if there's a way to raise your hand. I can't even see all of you. So, oh wait, I'm gonna put you guys on gallery mode, see if I can see you. Or maybe Chris can just take a look and just give me a sense of like, how many hand raises? If you've ever helped draft like a part of the patent, like, you know, the description part. Anybody? Do you see any? Okay, that's okay. That's okay. That's really helpful to know. So it's always helpful for me to sort of know where we are at. And yeah, so I'm happy to share with you some of this. So maybe before I start, let me just introduce myself to you. So my name is Jennifer Che. I've been living in Hong Kong for about 4+ years. I'm originally from the United States, as you can see from my background. I am originally a scientist. I studied chemistry at MIT and then worked as a medicinal chemist doing drug discovery at Millennium, which is now Takeda, for 6 years before I switched careers into patent law. Went to Suffolk Law in Boston and then worked in Boston for 15+ years in-house at a large company, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and also Excella, which is a small startup from Flagship, which is also behind Moderna, you know, the maker of the vaccine. So you guys might have heard of Moderna. So that's, and then in 2017, I moved to Hong Kong. So now I work at Eagle IP, where I help Hong Kongers, you know, file for patent applications globally. I am a US patent attorney myself, and then also helping people all around the world who want to file in China or Hong Kong. We help them with those as well. So we kind of do both types of work. So for Hong Kongers, for sure, we help people here sort of get patents all around the world, actually. Of course, we file in the US and China and Hong Kong, but we also work with a lot of attorneys around the world to help them get their IP protected everywhere. So I always like to start out a talk about patents to really explain the purpose of patents, because I think sometimes people might not fully realize what patents are for. Because a patent actually is an agreement between you, the inventor, and the government, actually. Because most people, if they think of an invention, they might be afraid that others will steal it. So they won't want to share about it. They don't want to tell people how to make it because they don't want anyone to copy. But the problem is, if nobody shares about their inventions, then people can't learn from each other. And the progress of technology actually slows down. So patents are put in place to encourage people to share about their inventions. When you file for a patent application, it gets published and the whole world gets to read about the instructions for how you make your invention, you know, like what the insides look like. It's not a secret anymore. But in exchange for sharing that to let people learn, they're actually not allowed to use it. So you can stop them from making, using, or selling for 20 years. So that is kind of the contract, the social contract that the inventor has with the government. So that's kind of the purpose behind patents. And it really gives you the right to exclude others from making, using, or selling the claimed invention within a certain period. Most notably is that a patent doesn't necessarily give you the right to make, use, or sell. It only allows you to stop others. And this can sometimes happen when you've got two parties that have overlapping patents. You can actually cover partially the same scope. In that sense, both sides have to get licenses from each other to practice. So keep in mind, the patent only allows you to stop others. It doesn't allow you and give you the right necessarily to practice, although usually you can often do that. So I just want to clarify that. And then, as I said, patents are meant to encourage people to share about their new innovations and their new ideas. So in order to get a patent, of course, you must first be the type of invention that's allowed to be patented. And I won't go into details, but there's certain things such as mathematical ideas or discoveries that you can't patent. It has to be an invention that you've invented. And it has to be novel. It has to be an innovation. It can't be something that somebody else already thought about and already is on the market, for example. And not only that, it has to be non-obvious. You can't just copy something that somebody made and slightly change it and get a new patent. A patent has to cover an invention that's worthy to be patented, which means it's novel, you know, contributes something, and you have to draft your application clearly. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about writing patents, right? How to write a good patent application. You must fulfill this requirement that the patent is sufficiently described, your invention is sufficiently described, and it's enabled. which means that somebody can read it, your instructions, remake your invention, and it'll work. You're not hiding something and leaving out key details. It has to work as promised and as claimed. And then you have to claim the invention, describing what part I own, what part can I stop you, and what part does not fall within the scope of my invention. So that's what a patent is, and that's what it has. So like I said, we're going to focus on the writing of it today. The yellow, what I've highlighted here is how do we sufficiently describe, how do we draft an application that's definitely enabled, and how do we claim the invention to clearly scope out the boundaries of our invention. As I mentioned, we have to meet all of these patentability requirements. Otherwise, the patent office will not grant you a patent and you won't have your 20 years of exclusivity. And only until you have that granted patent can you sue others. Just filing an application is no good. It gives you no rights. It has to be granted. I see a hand raised. I'm happy to take questions now. If we want, we can just make this a dialogue.
Okay, so I want to ask, if two parties say invent the same thing independently, but they have different methods of doing so. So would the first one to apply for the patents got the patent, or do they both get it?
It is a race to the patent office. So the first person who files will get the patent. Now, if they're making it with different methods, the second person can potentially file for a method, a new process for making the first invention. And it would not, there are different kinds of inventions. So the product claim means nobody can make this product. So the second guy can file for a method of making the product, product A with my method B. Now, the second person, unfortunately, will still have to get a license from the first person who filed for the patent on the product, because when you practice the method, you will eventually end up with the product, and the product is now infringing. So this is the reason why you want to be fast. The first one to the patent office, unfortunately, wins this contest. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Feel free to keep asking. Okay, so first I'm going to actually just give you some tips on how to read a patent, because a lot of people don't even know how to read it. And then they get a patent and they freak out because they say, oh no, our product is covered by our competitor and they just filed a patent on this and we're screwed, help, 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 what should we do? So sometimes I think people overreact a lot, and I don't think the media helps. So I just pulled some articles. What the media is saying: Apple patents a bold new innovation, a paper bag. Did you guys know that the paper bag where you get your iPhones and iPads in is actually patented? Or this is what this news article says. Apple apparently also patented a pizza box for pizzas. And then people were getting really upset about the Wuhan Institute of Virology patenting on another US company's drugs, Gilead's drug. How can you patent this? How can you patent that? These people don't know how to read patents. So they make these big assumptions when they kind of see things in the news. So first of all, I'd like to say that when you look at a patent, there are actually many parts, and I'll talk through each of these. There's a title, there's of course the abstract, there's a description where you describe what your invention is in as clearly as possible. You can use drawings, and then there's the claims, which talk about the scope of what you own. Okay, so let's take a look just for fun. I pulled out this paper bag patent, supposed patent application. So first of all, a huge difference is it an application or is it a patent? Those are two completely different things. And you can tell just by looking at it, it will say, this is a patent application publication, or this is a patent. A publication, anybody can get a publication. As long as you pay the fees and you file something, they will publish it. It could be crap. It could have no inventiveness at all. It could be somebody else's invention. It'll publish because that's just the part of the process. But it doesn't mean it's granted, and it doesn't mean it has any legal rights. Whereas a patent has been reviewed by the patent office, they've issued the proper rejections of what they think is wrong with it, you've made fixes, you've argued, and after many rounds, the final set of claims that are allowed do have legal rights. So that's a huge difference that some of these articles definitely didn't focus on. They just probably saw that publication and assumed that somebody had a patent. That's not true. A patent publication is very different from a granted patent that has legal rights. Secondly, you can see who owns the patent. So you look at the applicant, There's also applicant and inventors, and people get these confused. And sometimes people use the word author. They're like, I want to be an author on a patent. There's no such thing. You're either an inventor, which means you helped think of the idea and you help bring it to fruition, or you're an applicant or an assignee, which means you legally own the patent. So these are very different things, and you can find out a lot just by looking at the cover. You can say, oh, these are the guys, you know, Michael Koring or Eugene, these people invented this idea of the paper bag. But as employees of Apple, they probably had to give the rights of their IP to Apple. So they had to sign some document giving the rights, and Apple owns this. And you can definitely see this by this assignee section that says Apple owns, they're the assignee. They've been assigned the rights to the patent. So that's kind of interesting and useful. And then you can see, at least for patents only, applications will not have this, but patents will have a list of very closely related documents. These are documents that the examiner has reviewed and decided, you know, this, even though it's close, it might be another paper bag, for example, even though it's close, this invention is still innovative over these documents. They're usually the closest documents that come. And when you read this, then you feel comfortable that says, okay, the examiner has checked against these other patents, and these also cover paper bags of different kinds, but he has decided that this is different enough so that this patent is worthy of being innovative enough. And that's what this little list of patents are. And then finally, the claims. This is the most important part of the patent. The claims are at the end usually. You kind of scroll to the end or flip to the last page, and there'll be a section called claims, and this defines what the legal rights are. So when you read this, at first you might freak out about paper bags. You're like, oh no, I have a paper bag too. I'm gonna be sued by Apple. Then you read and you realize that it has to be a retail paper bag comprising a white bag container. So only white bags are covered by this patent. If it's turn it green, and you don't infringe anymore. White bag container, and then including solid bleach sulfate paper, a very specific paper with at least 60% post-consumer content. So mostly recycled material, right? More than half. And a handle that's also made of paper fiber yarn knitted in a circular knit pattern. That is really specific and quite narrow, actually. And then there's other claims that also claim other aspects of this paper bag. But this is just to tell you that whenever you pick up a patent, look at the claims before freaking out and check to see if it's a granted patent, because patent publications also have claims, but they're just wishful claims. The person is just wishing and hoping that these will be the rights, but then the examiner could reject a lot of these claims. And you have to look at the issued patent to know what actually has legal rights. Okay, so this is what I said. The claims are so important because they determine the legal boundary. And to find infringement, I see a hand, let me finish this. To find infringement, your product has to meet every single limitation in that claim. So earlier when I said the paper bag has to be white, it has to have 60% post-consumer materials, all these, every single one of these limitations has to be met. Okay, Isaac, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm just curious, why someone will have to do the patent that publications instead of like wait till the patent just comes out and I publish it? Why we have to do that?
I'm sorry, why do we have to what? I don't think I understand your question.
Oh, why do someone will do the publications? I mean,
you have to do the application first. That's this part of the process. You apply.
I mean the publications. The publications.
Yes, it publishes automatically. It is just part of the process. As I said earlier, the whole point of patents is for you to share your knowledge. So it's a requirement that once you file and apply, it will publish within 18 months. So
within 18 months.
Yeah, so it has to publish. Everybody will get a publication. That's just part of the process. And then eventually, if you do a good job, you'll get a granted patent. Otherwise, it just gets published and everyone knows your secrets and you have no patent. That happens too.
Oh, I see. So when this is like the procedures.
Yes,
when you file
the procedure.
Then, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Every single patent. You can sort of request for it not to publish, but this is very rare. I see another hand. Kakit.
Okay, sorry if I have to ask another question because
no
I'm
problem.
still curious. Okay. So if a guy or a woman, like if a person invents something very great, like life-saving medicines, and he or she applied for a patent with all these claims, and then he decided to abandon it. Like, can someone else, like some big medicine company, just claim it for themselves?
No.
Just curious about Okay.
No, there's two reasons why. One part of the patent law says you can't file on someone else's invention. You must be the inventor. You can't steal, basically. You're not allowed to steal and file someone else's invention as your own. That's just called stealing, and it's against the patent laws. You must file your own invention. You cannot file someone else's. Secondly, once they file, if it publishes, then if you try to file again, it's not novel because it's already out there. So what the examiner will do, the examiner will do a search and will find the first patent application. And then if you're filing the same thing, then he'll say, well, what's innovative about your invention? The old one's already been filed. So you have to be innovative over everything that's out there.
Okay, like I'm trying to ask this because like I see some really weird phenomena, like in U.S. patent, which I think you are professional in. Like in U.S. patent, there's some drug called insulin that's invented by someone a few decades ago, but there's like big companies still just claiming it, and I just want to understand what's happening in there. Right.
Well, claiming is different from getting a granted patent, right? Just because someone files an application means nothing until they get it granted. So they might just be filing. Like it depends if they're getting patents granted. They shouldn't be able to get a patent if somebody else has already filed on it, for example.
Okay, thank you.
So it depends, yeah.
Well, and I think is it like related to what he said a few decades ago, because like patent has only like 20 years of life, right? This is something related.
I can't hear you too well, but I heard you say something about 20 years.
Yeah, I think like his question saying that he filing something like a few decades ago.
Oh,
and I
yeah,
think
right.
maybe the time is also a thing. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just curious.
If you're talking, this is a completely different matter. If you're talking about, they're called Enablement patents. There were patents filed a long time ago where they had these grand ideas and then they didn't really sue people until much, much later when somebody thought of a way to actually practice it, and then they sued them on their old patent. And that's true that happened. It's a little harder now with the change in patent laws, and I won't go into the details of it, but if that is a little bit unfair, the Lemelson patents. It's trolls, basically, patent trolls. Yeah. Nico, I'll take your question as well.
For the application of a patent, does it needs for all the inventors to agree to file the patent, or is there, because I was thinking, would there be a conflict where maybe one of the inventors want to publish it as open source or something, while the others want to patent it, and there's a conflict when filing the patent? Would the one who have the who want to make it open source have the power to stop the patent filing?
All inventors do need to sign a declaration saying that they are the inventors and they agree with the filing. So the fact that one person disagrees, does the patent office actually stop it? That's a really good question. I think they may actually, and it's interesting because if that person wants to make an open source, he can actually just do it, you know? And then there's nothing the other people can do actually, because once you put it open source, you put it out in the public, and then you cannot patent it because it's published. So it's a really tricky situation actually. But yeah, if none of the inventors agree, I don't believe you should be able to file a patent application. But I should double check on that, because sometimes if an inventor is missing or doesn't sign, they'll still allow the application to proceed. So that's why I'm not exactly sure how you would prove that, but that's a really good question. I will take a look at that and see if I can get back to you with the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jennifer, there's a question asked about if a researcher has already published a paper, can he or she also file a patent based on that research?
It depends. So in the US, there is what's called a grace period for an inventor's own disclosure. Within 1 year, you could potentially still be able to file on your own disclosure, but then it's quite limiting in terms of you can only the part that you published on, you know? So if you found out other inventions surrounding it, that might be a little bit trickier. And then this doesn't work globally. So you won't be able to do it in Europe or in mainland China or other places. So it's still very limiting. It's still better not to publish first. But if you must, the US is a little friendlier to inventors. So they will let you have a limited grace period.
Okay,
Sometimes
thank
we
you.
have to rely on that. So,
Thank you.
sure. So I talked about claim scope, and I talked about how when you draft a claim, every single feature is considered when we think about infringement. So if your invention has 3 features, A, B, and C, white paper bag, recycled material, and has this similar type of yarn type string, then only if the infringing product includes all 3 will it be considered infringing. If the person designs around your product, right, and then makes a white paper bag with yarn, but only does 55% post-consumer, recycled material, then they don't infringe. So you have to think carefully about how you craft your claims in terms of how you want to, stop others. The goal is always this moving target, because I told you that your invention has to be novel. So what I've put on this chart here is what I call prior art. That is a term that we use in patent law to describe everything that's published in the world. It could be papers, it could be patent applications, it could be textbooks, it could be presentations, it could be blog posts, anything that talks about things that are similar to your invention. That's what I'm calling prior art in my picture here. And the I stands for infringers. These are people that are like your competitors or people that might copy you. So the goal, of course, you have to think about, you're like, well, I want to stop everybody, so I'm going to draft a really, really broad claim. The problem is your claim is not novel because it encompasses things that are already known. The patent office will reject a broad claim like that. It'll say it's not novel. It includes all other bags that are already in. If you say, I just want to claim a bag, any color, made out of paper, that's just not going to fly because there's already bags on the market that are made out of paper that are any color. So you won't get that patent. So then you try to make it really narrow. You say, I want a white bag that has, post-consumer materials, and it's 3 inches by 4 inches, and it's square, and you describe it really, really specifically. Now the problem is you only catch a few of your infringers, and maybe if you really said it had to be 3 by 4 inches, then somebody can make a 5-inch bag, and they're outside of your claims. So of course, the ideal goal is to find a patent claim that can cover all the copycats that you care about, but somehow avoids what's already out there. And that is the game we play whenever we draft claims. So let's just for fun, try to play a claiming game. Let's just pretend that you invented a chair. Your invention's on the left. And as of the time when you invented this chair, the only things that were known were prior art number 1, a bed, and a coffee table. So this is the world of furniture when you invented this chair, because you didn't like sitting on beds and you didn't like sitting on tables. So you thought, oh, let me invent this chair. It has this cool little backing. So how do we draft claims? We have to figure out what kind of subject matter it is. And then we use what's called a transition clause to explain how the elements are related. And then you list out your elements. And then if there's any limitations on the elements, then we put that at the end. For example, so here's an example. If this is a chair comprising a seat, 4 legs, and a back panel. And the back panel is attached to the back of the seat for resting the back of a user. Okay, so let's just say we drafted it and it's pretty clear. You can figure out what your invention is. Here's some other ways we could write this claim, because there's many, many ways to write claims. You could say it's a chair comprising, which is like including, it means it includes but isn't limited to, a seat with a flat surface for sitting a person thereon, 4 legs attached under the seat for support thereof, support of the seat, and then a back panel attached vertically to the back of the seat for resting the back of said person. Or conversely, we could write it as a device for sitting. So now we're really getting a little broader, comprising a body support element for supporting a lower portion of a person thereon. Lower portion is your butt, basically. And then a base element, something on the bottom, for supporting the said body support element, which is the top part, the seat. We're calling it a body support element thereon. This one's really broad. So let's say you wrote this claim, a seat with a flat surface for sitting, 4 legs, kind of the first one that we described, claim 1. And these people start to copy. All these people, you're seeing these come up on the market after you've invented your chair. Which of these chairs do you think your patent claim covers? Who can you go after? Who is making a seat with these features? A flat surface, 4 legs attached underneath, a back panel vertically to the back of the seat. First one? Yeah, maybe. It's got a flat back. Are the 4 legs attached under? Sure. A back panel. Is it attached to the back? I can't tell, but maybe. So let's just, for the benefit of, for the sake of the argument, we'll say it does fall within. And we've got the second one and the third one. And it's interesting because once you start to see how people can creatively design around, you wonder, should I have written my claims that way? This person only has 1 leg. The swivel chair has maybe 5 feet, or is it 5 legs, or is it 1 leg? But in any case, even if it's 5 legs, they're not attached to the seat, right? Not directly. So there's creative ways in which people may be getting around your patent. This bottom, what do you call it, stool-like chair here has a back, but the back is not attached to the back of the seat. It's attached to the sides, right? And the rocking chair, forget it, it doesn't have 4 legs. So all of a sudden you realize that if you draft your claim too closely to just what your product looks like, you might not really capture creative people who are going to design around your patent. So there was the second one that we drafted, the really broad one, the one that said a body support element for supporting a lower portion. This is just the seat. It doesn't talk about its shape or anything. And the bottom, using functional language, a bottom base element that supports the top element, right? Essentially, that's all it says. And then all of a sudden, you might say, well, all of these now fall within, right? They all have a seat-like thing, right? And they all have this leg-like, whatever you want to call it, like a bottom portion that supports the top portion. So potentially, your second claim is really broad and it covers everything. But as I said, covering your infringers is only 1/2 the battle, right? The examiner is going to look at the prior art and decide, is your claim novel? Is your invention novel? In my earlier, very broad claim, let's think about this. A body support element for supporting a lower portion of a person thereon. Can my bed do that? Is there a body? Sure, I guess the mattress would be a body. It supports at least the lower portion of your body when you lie on it. And this table, I think it could do the same thing. And the base element, well, yeah, the bed has this bottom platform bit. And then similarly, the coffee table has legs. So the problem is when I draft my claims like this, even though it covers all my competitors, it doesn't actually, it also covers the prior art. And then I'll get a rejection for novelty. It is not new. It's too generic. So what do? Well, maybe I can make some amendments. So this is what happens when we file a patent application. We often will get a rejection that says this is too broad, and then we have to amend the claim. So what I've done is in underline, I've added some limitations. Like, okay, a body support element with a supporting surface, and the supporting surface is for supporting, the lower portion of a person. And then I'm also going to add the limitation wherein the size of the supporting surface is smaller than 2 by 2. Okay, now I've successfully gotten around the bed, any coffee table, unless if it's a really small table, but let's just pretend that that's not the case in this world. And I only capture chairs because most chairs are 2 by 2. So this is a way to kind of carve around the prior art and to get my granted patent. So here's my new claim. What happens if I find out prior art number 3? A log. Does it have a supporting surface? It's 2 by 2. Does it have a base element supporting a top element? I don't know. It's one piece, right? So this might get around my patent anyway, even though you can easily sit on it because it only has one piece, or maybe it doesn't. So this is when you start to argue. And this is when you hope that your application is written clearly enough that you've either thought of situations like this where you say in some embodiments, the body support element and the base element are actually a single piece of wood or a single piece of something. And if you define it that way, then you might be able to get around it. But if you haven't said anything at all and you just described your chair, then it's going to be up to the judge, it's going to be up to the jury to think about it, and there's going to be arguments, and it's going to be a lot messier. So that's another reason why it's really a good idea to write a lot of detail and to think ahead of all sorts of design arounds to write it in your patent application. So let's go back to the paper bag. I've already kind of given some examples, so I think this is pretty easy at this point, but if we analyze Apple's paper bag patent, we can see that a red bag or a brown bag would definitely not fall under it because a white bag is definitely one of the key elements. And you can analyze to see if it's formed of bleached sulfate paper. I think that's probably pretty easy for scientists in that field to know how to figure out. And then 60% post-consumer content and this handle. So, it's quite possible, I don't know, this white version of my bag falls within and then Apple could sue them, for example. So I wanted to go back to the pizza boxes because this was all over the news, right? The Verge is like, Apple patented a pizza box for pizzas. So I was curious. So I actually went in the patent office system and look at that. Apple never, ever successfully got an issued patent. They filed this, I think, in 2010. And essentially, it was finally rejected. You see, they tried really hard. They had summaries of interviews. They had multiple rounds of rejections, and they kept replying and amending their claims. And eventually, they just gave up. So the Verge is wrong. The author did not know that the patent never granted. Apple did not patent a pizza box. Apple just filed for a patent application that had a publication at most. They never got a patent. So that's just to show that if you know how to read patents, then you won't nearly be as scared because you might find out that it has absolutely no rights. Okay, so I want to focus a bit on the description because that's the part that a lot of scientists are involved in helping out with, in terms of drafting. This is probably the part that if you ever are involved in a patent application with a firm, the patent attorneys will be the ones that will draft the claims because it's very legal. The language of how you craft the boundaries of your application, it's really important to have a professional do that part. But the description where you talk about the examples of how you make your invention, that oftentimes is done by the scientist because the scientist knows the technical details of the instructions of this is what you do, this is what you react with this, and this is how you analyze it, and this is how you test it, and this is how you find the result. So that's the part where scientists will be involved with the most. And really, it's important. Here's the patent law on the right. You can see it. The specification includes a written description, and you must teach how to make and use the invention. You must draft it clearly enough such that you can enable another scientist, someone is called a person skilled in the art, would be able to read your instructions, recreate, repeat your experiments, and come up with the same results. You must provide enough detail. They should not need to do undue experimentation, keep trying different conditions because you actually didn't give them enough information. And then you're supposed to set forth the best mode, as in don't hide the good ways of doing your invention and just show the really bad ways so that when someone does it, they can barely get it to work, but it's really bad. You really need to show everything. You don't have to highlight it and say, this is my best one, but you should include it. So these are requirements in the patent law. So here's kind of, as we hone down into a deeper level, this is how I typically like to draft my patent applications. There is a detailed description section, which, once the claims are drafted, we take that same language, but then we add a bit more explanations about the invention. We might use drawings and figures and really in detail talk through the different parts of the invention. There's a methods section where you need to explain how to make and use your invention, especially for inventions that are not obvious on how you would make it. A pizza box is one thing. Maybe, well, actually, that pizza box maybe needed some special conditions, I'm not sure. But certain very highly technical, like certain new molecules or like a, new biological, I don't know, maybe genetically modified organism, you probably need to show them exactly the steps of how you did it, and you must provide this clearly. And then really important is actual examples, working examples of your invention. It's one thing to just describe conceptually what it is, but to actually show, here is an example of, if it's a molecule, this particular molecule, it is helpful in, as a paint thinner or as good as, treating cancer, whatever it is. Here's examples of the molecule. Here's how you make it. Here's where I tested it. Here's how it works. It does cure cancer, or it does stop the progression of this disease. If it's something physical like the pizza box, I guess you would have exact measurements for this type of pizza box, 3 inches by 4 inches, added 4, I don't know, 4 cups of paper malt and added some, I don't know, water and dried it under the sun, whatever it is. The more examples, the better. And especially if it's close to stuff that's already out there, you must show why it's innovative. It's important to tell a story, in a sense, for the examiner to understand. The problems in this world right now is that all pizza boxes are square, and it really makes a real problem. I don't know, whatever it is. And then you talk about how your invention solves that problem. So here's an example of a chair, where I personally just took that claim that I wrote and I just added some details where I said, back panels comes in all shapes and sizes. They can be flat, blah, 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 blah. And to be honest, even though it says vertical, this degree could actually be 75 to 105 degrees. It doesn't have to be exactly 90, just in case you make yours 89, still counts, and maybe defining some terms. I might say the 4 legs may be evenly spaced out, but they don't have to be. And then just give some description to kind of round out the scope of my invention. finally, I talked about methods, really providing clear instructions on how to make and providing the specific examples. Showing comparison data is great if your invention is very close. I think the paper bag one might be interesting. Actually, I think I have, why don't I skip ahead just in case I don't have time? So I think, yeah, because let me skip that cup example. Let's take a look at, here are some drawings of the paper bag. And the paper bag application actually, if you kind of go into it, has a section that talks about conventional bags that are made with, they're usually made with 50% or less post-consumer content, because once you add too much recycled material, it becomes quite weak and is prone for tearing. So here it is, telling you about the problem and then explaining how their invention, the way they have such folds and gussets at certain corners, that they're able to make a 60% post-consumer content type paper bag, and it's still very strong. So once you read these advantages as an examiner, you might first be like, what's the big deal? It's a recycled bag. Why is this inventive? But once they put it out here and tell you about the advantages and the problems that the world was facing, then the examiner is going to be much more kind of appreciative of, oh, that's why I want this kind of paper bag. It really is really innovative. And even better yet, if Apple had done a test with like 2 different kinds of paper bags and did like a weight test and showed like, wow, this paper bag is 5 times better. Examiners love any sort of comparison data. I find that if you can just provide comparison data, even if it's really obvious, it seems really obvious, if you just show, look, 60% versus 50% is a world of a difference, and it's really hard to do a 60% without these little folds, then the examiner is going to give you a patent. And this particular patent was granted, unlike the pizza box, which maybe just didn't really have such good, who knows? I didn't go and review its prosecution history, but it's all public. So it's sometimes fun to just read through the rejections and see how, the other side tries to fight for the patent, and eventually they either give up or they get the patent. So that's kind of cool too. So really the best practices for patent drafting, really, make sure your claim scope is clear, because this is what everyone else is going to be looking at when they think about whether they infringe or not. They want to read, and you want it to be clear, sort of what you're actually covering. It's really important to have clear instructions and make sure that whoever is trying to repeat your experiment or make your invention based on your instructions, that it works. Because otherwise, if you're not sharing with the public, you don't deserve a patent, is what the government is going to be saying. Enablement is important. So as I said, make sure your instructions are clear. And I will say that the standard will depend on the level of the typical person who's going to be working in this area. So I'm a chemist. So as a chemist, I know that if you just say something like, purification by column chromatography, that generally, and you give me a few conditions, I don't need you to tell me, get some silica gel, pour it into, the glass column, and now add some liquid and wait and pump air through it, because most people know how to do that. So you don't need to go to that level. You just need to tell what a typical tell them what a typical scientist wouldn't know, because it's your invention and there's aspects of your invention that are new. So you want to leave that, make sure that part is really clear, but the general stuff that everyone knows, you can generally leave out, or you can, if you're nervous, you can point to a textbook and say, people know how to do these. I don't need to describe it, but if you're in doubt, you can check, textbook on organic chemistry. It will tell you how to do this type of acid-base reaction or something like that. That's always a nice way to, as a backup in case, And then finally, as I said, patents, your invention has to be novel and inventive. And it's really nice to tell the examiner why. Help the examiner see the best is data showing the unexpected findings. But even if you just lay out the problem a little bit and say, this is the problem in the universe, and we have solved the problem by doing it this way. For certain countries especially, it's actually a requirement. The EU, Europe, and China will require some sort of problem and solution. The US does not. The US you just write your invention, it's okay. But certain jurisdictions require that you actually give it a problem. So here's some common mistakes that I want to talk through. I told you, you want the standard so that a person of ordinary skill can repeat successfully. I talked about all that. In general, sometimes people forget that if you bought something and it's a certain brand, that might not be so useful if 2 years down the road, that brand's product changes its name. So for example, if there's a buffer solution that has a brand name, it's still better to write what the contents of that buffer solution are, for example. And if it is something where you don't even know what's in there, at least give the source so that, again, your standards that somebody can repeat it. So if they know, if I go to Aldrich, Sigma Aldrich, and I purchase this lot number, then I will be able to, then I'll be able to repeat it. And then use clear generic names instead of brands, ideally, if you can. Yes. So how? I'll take your question.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned earlier that the range of the claims should not be too large, but I think wouldn't a large claim range make the patent protection wider?
So yes, it depends. Everybody would love to have a broad patent protection. So it's not true that you don't want it. The problem is if it's so broad that it covers known inventions, then it will never be granted. So yes, the best is to get a broad claim that is in a field that no one thought of, because then there's nobody around you. If you're the first person to ever think of some kind of space rocket, then there's nothing out there. So you are the first. And since you're first, you can probably get a broad claim. But when people start to enter that field and they're making their versions of space rockets or whatever this invention is, then you cannot be broad. So yes, we all want broad claims, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
But it's difficult. So you must draft backup positions. So claims, there's many claims. Claim 1 is usually the broadest claim. It's your wishful claim scope, but we always like to draft backup positions. We might draft narrower and narrower and narrower because we don't know what the examiner is going to find. And we don't want to have nothing at the end of the day. So the examiner might reject claim 1 or claim 2 because it's too broad because they found something that's similar. But hopefully claim 7 or claim 10, I've come very close to my product. Let's say in my chair example, I've come down to saying it's 2x2, that it has legs, 4 legs or whatever. And that's because the examiner found 3-legged chairs and found stools and tables and beds. But if I'm the first person to ever invent a chair, and before that everybody was sitting on the ground and there were no such thing as legged chairs or not or anything, then maybe I can get the broadest claim. And then that would be really great. But very few people are doing breakthrough inventions where nothing is out there. Most people are in a field where there's some stuff and they innovate based on, smaller improvements. So I'm being practical, I guess. Thank you. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's the first one. I talked about not disclosing enough detail is a problem because I think for patent applications, you really want to give as much detail as possible, sometimes because of these backup positions. So if you have patents with claims that are broad and vague, and then the examiner finds a problem because something falls within the scope, sometimes if the specification or the application doesn't have any actual examples of the actual, let's say the chair you actually made, the one that says 2x2 and all this stuff, then I have no way to amend my claims. I didn't talk about this earlier, but there is a rule that when you amend a patent application, you can't just make up a new scope because it's too late. All of your scopes must be in there as filed, and then you can only pick and choose from the scopes that you had already drafted. You can't come up with a new scope. You're just not allowed. That's just one of the rules. So when you're drafting, it's important to draft it in a way that has multiple scopes. So this includes design arounds. So even though your product might be a chair, you have to think and say, how can people design around that? They might remove one of the legs. So let's also claim that it can only include at least 3 legs, because 2 legs is too little, because then it might not stand, right? So you have to still describe the invention in a way that works. So maybe you can do at least 3 legs, or you could say 1 leg as long as it's wide enough to support the weight. There's ways to design around. And then once you design around though, you have to make sure that it works. Just like I said, 2 legs might not work because your chair won't stand. So, the way to kind of enable a larger scope is to continue making different test cases. I call them working examples. So my picture on the side gives an example of what a typical patent, some weakly drafted patent applications might look like this. They have a really broad claim. They say something like, I claim a chair, with the top and a bottom. And then they show some examples of the chairs that they've made. And they all have 4 legs and a back, and they all have different seats, but the seat cover is different. One is a blue seat cover and one's a green seat cover. The problem is you're claiming such a broad invention, but your examples are all of 4-legged chairs. So the examiner is not going to believe that a 3-legged chair or a chair with a, without a back is actually going to work, let's say. The better way to do this, so the examiner will only give you a patent for the four-legged chair that has, whatever you've shown. But if you make all these different kinds of chairs and you describe it in your application, you say, I can make a stool, I can make a three-legged chair, I can make a chair made out of wood, out of plastic, I can make a rocking chair, I can make all these different chairs, and you show the examiner by giving these examples, the examiner is much more likely to give you the broader scope because you've actually proved that it works and you've shown, let's say you've tested them and all the chairs can hold a certain weight, you've got a pretty strong patent, and provided there's no prior art, of course, in that area. So that's it. So I hope that gives you at least a sense of kind of basic patent concepts in terms of how to think about drafting